Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you, Bond, for inviting me to this very interesting annual meeting. I must admit that whatever may be the differences between UK and India, our politicians look and behave like as Lawrence has mentioned, I'm going to kick off this discussion from my vantage point, which is predominantly the Asian context. And what does international development in a changing world mean? What could be the potential challenges for international NGOs? It does not require to be repeated that nearly half the population of the world lives in Asia. 1/3 of the global GDP comes from Asia. 2/3 of the young people are in Asia. And this year, which many people say is a very bad year in economic terms around the world, China would register a 9% annual growth, India 6.5%, and I hear that UK is running 6th consecutive quarter of recession. Therefore, in the Asian context today, there was a recent survey you may have seen where optimism about the future was gauged, and the most hopeful folks were in Asian region, most optimistic about the future. So while people are imagining that the world is changing or some economies are emerging, in the mindsets of Asians, it has already happened. It is for the rest of the world to come to terms with it. So in the Asian context today, the dominant, prominent, mainstream agenda is growth, economic growth. All other issues like climate change, etc., can be addressed if we can get growth. And that's the discourse in G20, and that's the discourse in Copenhagen. There has been major shifts. I think Asian region is becoming a fulcrum for not only hope and optimism and growth rates in GDP terms, but also in technology and enterprise. And it is merely a re-emergence of a phenomena that dates back 5,000 years in history. Asian traders did exist before Christ. They're just coming back after 2,000 years. There is also a shift in the perception as to what external assistance means in the region. Official development assistance, ODA as we have come to know of it, is actually largely irrelevant in Asia, except for a few small countries like Cambodia, Laos, maybe Bangladesh, Nepal. For the rest of the region, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, India, ODA is non-existent. And therefore, the model of resource transfer in terms of pounds and euros and dollars, around which the relationship historically between OECD-based NGOs and Asian NGOs was built, is a model that requires rethink. Diaspora remittances, trade surpluses, and tax revenues within the government are far more important in producing or not producing development in Asian societies than ODA. While IDA contributions, the concessional contributions in Asian countries have declined, interesting thing is that more and more Asian governments are taking IBRD loans. And therefore the demand for capital is there, but not for assistance. In fact, there is a reverse flow in the last 5 to 7 years. Reverse flow about which very little is known, because many Asian governments are providing a new form of ODA to Central Asian, African countries. Some of it is linked to resource capture. Some of it is being called new imperialism or new form of colonialism, doesn't matter. China is supposed to be doing $5 to $6 billion a year, dollars. India claims periodically $1 billion plus dollars a year. But there is no place where you can read these statistics. There is no website like DFID's as to the Chinese, Indian ODA, Malaysian ODA, Thai ODA, etc. Of all the Asian countries which are doing ODA, the only ones which are registered under OECD are Japan and South Korea. So in a way, whether it is Paris Declaration or Accra Agenda for Change or whatever else you have, none of it actually matters to those who are not part of OECD. So very soon it will raise the question of the irrelevance of OECD as well, because those who belong do not add up to much, and those who don't belong actually are the major players. So the second point I want to make with you is, in this reality, what's the role? But in order to answer that question, we have to answer the question, what is our theory of change? How do you think change will happen in our societies? Whether it's change related to poverty eradication, change related to dealing with conflicts, change related to climate change, how will that happen in our societies? And your theory of change has as much to do with your actions as anything else. Even your ability to mobilize resources from DFID or European Union or anybody else is largely dependent on your theory of change. And for that to happen, it may be useful to look at how change has happened in your own society over the last 300-400 years. Because it's not going to happen any more differently. Democracy and development will go somewhat hand to hand, but 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. It will be extremely messy. The process of state building, as DFID would like to call it, is not going to happen without context. And the state building, even within India, in one region, takes a different trajectory than the state building in another region, because of historical and contemporary forces. If role of independent voice, civil society, media, academia has been important in the evolution of Britain as a democracy, as a stable state, not fragile, I hope, it will also be important in other societies in Asia. But their trajectories will have to be unique and distinctive to their context. And therefore, it will be very hard to predict in a 3-year log frame what precisely you can deliver into